We could start with the most breaking news, which is that, as people probably know, Claudine Gay, who was the president of Harvard, has stepped down following a congressional hearing that was presided over by Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. We actually have a clip of Elise Stefanik, just to refresh people's memories of the kind of questioning that Claudine Gay suffered through at the hands of Elise Stefanik. So let's take a look.
Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
And of course, the calls for genocide that Stefanik is referring to are things like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" and Intifada. The president of Penn resigned, and now Claudine Gay has resigned, and people, of course, are celebrating. And Stefanik said 2 down, as in 2 people have resigned so far. So what are your thoughts on this? And of course, the pretext for having her, forcing her to resign is allegations of plagiarism, but it's pretty clear that that's not what this is truly about.
What happened to President McGill and now Claudine Gay, it's the biggest assault on academic freedom in our history in one regard since the beginning of the 19th century. So allow me to explain what I mean by that. The whole issue of academic freedom in our country, it first arose at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century. It was when the robber barons were running amok on the one hand, and there was the emergence of the workers' movement to resist the gross, egregious exploitation. So what happened? The robber barons, they're very rich, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, and they play a big role in higher education because they're endowing it. These are private schools, just like today. And some professors, a few, a handful, were supporting the workers. And the robber barons wanted that speech from the faculty, not students. From the faculty, they wanted that speech stifled. There were two major cases. They'll come to me in a moment, the names. In one was Ross, and the other was, oh God, I knew the guy. It'll come to me. In any case, that was the struggle to restrict the influence of big money in academia. The robber barons were trying to stifle free speech or academic freedom. We're trying to stifle academic freedom. And that's when, in our history, the whole tradition of academic freedom emerged. It was the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, excuse me, American Association of University Professors, AAUP. And very impressive minds, first among them, John Dewey. They wrote up a whole series of principles on academic freedom in order to try to preempt the big business, the robber barons from determining what's taught in college. Now, the most essential principle of academic freedom is very simple. Couldn't be more simple. It's that professors are in the best position to judge who is and who isn't qualified to teach, that it shouldn't be determined by robber barons, and it shouldn't be determined by religious, I'll use the word if I'm not so comfortable with it. It shouldn't be religious bigots who decide. It shouldn't be robber barons who decide. It's only your peers who decide. If a professor wants to teach physics, the most qualified to judge the competence of that professor to teach physics is, I think you can fill in the blank, who is most qualified to judge who should teach physics? Should it be religious elders? Should it be robber barons? Or should it be other physicists?
Probably the latter, the third option.
Yeah, pretty obvious. And you have, with that answer, you have struck gold. That is the essential position, the core of academic freedom. And further, as a development of that, is the principle of faculty self-government, that the faculty are the most competent and qualified to determine what should be the university's agenda, distribution of departments. You got defining a university, defining the internal life of a university. It's called faculty self-governance. That's why every university has a faculty senate. That's how it works. Now, there was another major interference in academic freedom, of course, McCarthyism. But McCarthyism was the political interference by the state in determining who teaches and who doesn't, the anti-communist hysteria. But the nearest analog to what just happened is what happened with the robber barons. However, on a much higher scale, it is unthinkable that a president of a university would be overthrown by big money. Impossible. We are talking about the presidents of the most prestigious institutions in our country: Harvard, U of P, and MIT. We're not talking about Podunk Community College. The idea that this Jewish billionaire class can steamroll a president of Harvard is so breathtaking. Now remember, I never made it in academia, and I have no love lost with academia. But I do agree with President McGill when she said, if this happens, namely her being forced to resign, it's going to be a huge blow to our academic life. A huge blow. It means the billionaire class gets to decide. If they can decide who's president, they get to decide everything. It's the end of academic freedom. It's the end of faculty self-governance. It's the end of peers deciding, rather than some billionaire thug who, you know what Balzac famously said, the novelist, behind every great fortune is a crime. So this billionaire criminal class will now determine if they can determine the president, they can determine every facet of university life. This was an utter catastrophe. And I'm speaking as somebody who was never, there was never any love lost between me and academia, but I get what's happening. I get what a ghastly precedent it is. And I've talked to many student organizations, including at U of P and at Harvard, and I've said, your first demand when school resumes, McGill has to be restored. And that should be the first demand at Harvard. Claudine Gay has to be restored. Because if you don't restore her, you've set a ghastly precedent. And you will be the alumni of a generation of students that allowed for the stifling, really the end. It's the end of academic freedom. It is. I mean, that may sound dramatic, but on that point, I agreed with McGill. She said, if this happens, it's the end of that. A gang of billionaires decided we're getting rid of her. As to the plagiarism, okay, maybe we'll just leave the issue of plagiarism aside for a moment, and you can question me on what I just said.
But hasn't there been a precedent of people, especially when they are go against conventional wisdom or go against the grain on Israel-Palestine, of being fired?
Look, obviously there have been cases. I'm quite intimately familiar with one of them. There's a very big difference between pressure being brought to bear to get rid of a faculty. Remember, Katie, in my day, when I say my day, I'm talking about 15 years ago, that was always done very discreetly behind the scenes.
Okay. So it's like it's the brazenness of it now.
Exactly. It's not as if people came out and said, he's pro-Palestine, get rid of him. No, they never said that. They said things like, I was not a congenial scholar. I was, too much with the verbal fisticuffs. That was the grounds for getting rid of me. The idea that, first of all, I was a nobody, and let's be for real. I had a tiny reputation, but this is going after the president of our top colleges. It's so, and totally in the open, totally brazen. You get rid of her, or I'm taking back $100 million. That's not small change. You get rid of her, right. I'm taking back $50 million. At Columbia, all of a sudden, the president got this genial idea. Let's open up a center for the fight against anti-Semitism. Really? We really need that? We have Israel studies already. We have Holocaust studies already. Now we need a new center to fight anti-Semitism. You can get already a degree in Jewish naval contemplation. How much do you need?
A JNC.
Yeah, right. JNC. Jewish studies, Israel studies, Holocaust studies, anti-Semitism studies, and these are all bones just thrown to the rich alumni. These departments have no content. You know why Israel Studies was formed? It was formed because in the Middle East Studies Association, MESA, a consensus gradually crystallized supporting the Palestinians. So the pro-Israel folks realize it's a lost cause to fight the battle in Middle East studies. So what do? They just create a new propaganda discipline called Israel Studies. Why do you have a whole discipline about one country? It's 14 million people. Do we have Botswana studies? Do we have Guinea-Bissau studies? It's just bones they throw. So she decided to throw a new bone with the Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. So I agree. You know, people have been penalized, but it was always done with a certain amount of discretion, and now it's just done with sheer braverness, sheer thuggery. You know, really, it's a sight to behold. It really is.
J.A. Savage writes, Bill Ackman, a Harvard alumni, is a Jewish billionaire hedge fund manager of Pershing Square Capital Management, now worth $4.5 billion. He's, of course, was very vocal about this.
There were quite a few, huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
You know, I can understand. If you know anything about academia, the main job of a university president has nothing to do with academics. It's to raise money. Their job is fundraising. So you can imagine what a liability these professors were once the billionaire class said, we're pulling our money.